O Lord of hosts, be with us, for we have none other help in times of adversity but Thee. O Lord of hosts, have mercy on us.
It began with realizing, and we're going to look at a historical overview. And here, let me just bring that up real quick so we can see a little bit of what I'll be discussing. And so like this right here, the history of brain machine implants, we can see that back in 1780 here, Luigi Galvani discovers that muscles of dead frogs can be stimulated using an electrical spark. And this is a picture of him taking a dead frog that's already been dissected, and in fact, placing an electric stimulus to it and seeing that the muscles actually contract. And this is huge for this research because it began to understand that there is a sort of electrical system in regard to the central nervous system and how the human body functions, but the body is of really all organisms. We move down our timeline here. We see that in 1870, Edward Hitzig and Gustav Fritsch caused muscle movements through the electrical stimulation of specific parts of a dog brain. And so this is the first time where they begin to add electrical stimulus to the brain, of which they did with a dog. But we, as you can imagine, within 100 years, this is going to be done inside of humans. 1874, Robert Bartholomew experiments with electrical stimulation in the brain of a woman with a hole in her head. And then where I'm going to really be picking up is right here in 1952. Dr. Jose Delgado demonstrates the ability to control behavior using implanted electrodes by stopping a charging bull. Now, this is huge because as the second half of the title implicates, implants and remote control of the body. We'll get into a little bit of who Jose Delgado was, but he certainly wasn't a friend. He was actually a political philosopher as well as a neurosurgeon. And so he actually had some thoughts that we probably would not be supportive of in regards to a rejection of the concept of the individual or any sort of primacy of the individual. He actually believed that the United States was built on a faulty premise because he believed, based on this research that got going in regards to cybernetics, that there were too many societal influences on individuals to actually be autonomous and truly have free will. And therefore, he believed that the only thing that has rights is society as a whole. And I want to highlight here that again, if anybody wants to be very generous this Christmas season and help me out, I would love for somebody to help me purchase this book right here, Physical Control of the Mind Toward a Psycho-Civilized Society. This is a book from 1970, actually documenting by Dr. Jose Delgado his research. And so it's toward a psycho-civilized society. He believed that through the implantation of various electrodes that we could then become more civilized. This is going to relate to some research regarding race riots in the 1960s, of which many of these doctors used that as a impetus to experiment with people that were violent and how they could inhibit violence because it was a threat to our liberal democracy. And so this is a bit of an expensive book. It's a very important book. I really want to use it for my research. And that is an $80 paperback book that if you would be so generous tonight, maybe you guys can help me get enough funds. I would love to purchase this book. And let me just tell you a little bit about what it's about. So physical control of the mind and manipulation of the brain is a novel event in human history. In this volume, Dr. Jose M.R. Delgado describes his pioneering work in implanting electrodes in the brains of cats, monkeys, and men, as we'll see a bull in particular. That was part of this presentation, this little PowerPoint here. This is where he was able to demonstrate by putting electrodes in a bull. The bull he could get to charge, so he had a matador inside the ring. This occurred in Spain, although most of his research occurred in the United States. And the bull would charge, as you would expect, with the big red cape and the matador. But then he would step in the ring. The matador would leave. He would get a red cape, as he has in this photo, and he would stimulate the bull's brain, and it would stop in its tracks and run away from him, demonstrating that he could control physical behavior of animals despite their normal biological tendencies. And so this book, that's where his research is in. So through electrical stimulation of specific cerebral structures, Delgado demonstrates how movements can be induced by radio command. Hostility may appear or disappear. Social hierarchy can be modified. Sexual behavior may be changed, and memory, emotions, and the thinking process may be influenced by remote control. The mind is no longer unreachable and may be the subject of experimental investigations, according to Delgado. We need to reorient the aims of civilization to restore a balance between its physical and psychological evolution. Our present mechanized society is dangerously self-perpetuating and should be psycho-civilized in order to develop wiser minds to intelligently control our awesome technological advances. Dr. Delgado believes mankind's primary objective should be, quote, not the development of machines, but of man himself. He writes lucidly about this work, putting it into the context of what is known about the mind and the brain and exploring long-range ethical and social implications for his discoveries. Despite the ongoing controversy over his work, the result is an exceedingly important and provocative book. Jose Delgado was born in Ronda, Spain, and received his medical training at Madrid University, where he was an associate professor of physiology until 1950, when he came to Yale University to work with Dr. John Fulton. He became a professor of physiology at Yale, where he developed techniques for electrical and chemical stimulation of the brain. He published more than 200 scientific papers and became perhaps the most notorious mind control researcher in the history of neurobehavioral research. So this is actually quite an important book. If you guys would be appreciative of what we're trying to do, I would love for you guys to help me out and try to raise enough funds tonight that I might be able to purchase this book and do a presentation here for you guys on it, providing an overview. Oh, thank you so much. We got a super chat that came in from Anglo Christian, throws in $10, and thank you very much for that. And we had another one come in from Beyond Seraphim, throws in $20, says, Merry Christmas. Let's get you this book. Thank you so much. I really want to get this. And again, I'll read the whole thing and provide a chapter by chapter overview for you guys because it's fascinating, right? I saw a little bit of the content, and it's literally documenting every activity that man has participated in, politics, religion, relationships, and how his research has given him new insights on how these things can be manipulated. So even though it's an old book, it's from 1970, I think it's monumental in regards to my dissertation research regarding transhumanism because it's a missing link. As we'll see in some of the academic papers, it's interesting that they want to often skip over this part of the research, the 1950s and 60s. I'll show you a few academic papers that point that out. Oh, thank you so much. Melly throws in $10 after donating 5 COTEL Crew memberships. Thank you so much, Melly. I really appreciate that, guys. Thank you very, very much. Such a loving term, manipulated, really conveys their good intentions. Exactly. And so Dr. Delgado it appeared to have more of a communistic leaning and was very antagonistic to what he considered the American project because he was in opposition to the Declaration of Independence because it was too focused on the individual and individual freedom, which again, he rejected based on his research and his ability to manipulate people by putting in electrodes and stimulating different parts of their brain. And he said, well, based on this, that, man really isn't truly autonomous, and to develop a civilization based on the presupposition of individualism, he considered to be a detriment. So this is something that I really want to research and get into. But in regards back to our PowerPoint presentation, so even before Dr. Delgado in 1952, in 1924, Hans Berger used an EEG to record the electrical activity of the human brain for the first time. Why is that important? That's very important because, as we'll see, the EEGs And this is the brain waves in which that can be monitored. Now they can put stuff on your scalp to monitor these. This is also how Neuralink works, by putting in these very, very small wires. When they put in the electrode of the Neuralink into your brain, it can monitor, again, the electrical activity in your brain. And so what they believe, because they're using cybernetics, this understanding of these informational feedback loops, that, well, really what we need to do is figure out how to communicate directly with the brain. And they believe that EEGs were the first non-symbolic language. And this is going to actually tie to some of the research, very controversial research, of a gentleman named, let me see if I can find it real quick. Here it is right here. Norbert Weiner. Norbert Weiner developed the autocorrelator, which was basically a massive computer in the 1950s, where he was able to, and I'll show you a photo. This is Norbert Weiner Studios. This is him recording brain waves emerging from the autocorrelator. This was a massive machine, the first machine, and this was a breakthrough in brain research, because they could put these electrodes into the brains of animals and humans. And initially, there was a 20-minute feedback loop that they could see directly what was happening in the brain, what was being stimulated. And in return, the autocorrelator could send information back to the brain. Now, just within a decade or so, these autocorrelators got more advanced, and by the third generation, they were actually real time. So while somebody was actually moving about, doing activities, they could map the EEG, the brain waves of that person. Now, why is this going to be really important for our part one discussion tonight? Because when we start to look at Neuralink, this is exactly what they're doing, except I have videos of Elon Musk specifically stating that the full intentions of Neuralink is a symbiosis of man and machine, particularly advanced artificial intelligence. And so the AI system, much like the autocorrelator here, is going to be feeding info back to your brain, stimulating your brain in certain ways, and potentially even shutting off certain parts of your brain. We just did a stream on extropianism, the central philosophy of transhumanism, and philosopher David Pearce of the UK is a utilitarian, or a negative utilitarian philosopher, who wants to eliminate suffering. Some of you guys might remember he even wants to reprogram carnivorous animals so that they'll no longer eat other animals, to eliminate suffering. Now, this brings up huge questions in regards to, if you eliminate suffering, if you begin to implant these electrodes and you begin to shut off certain parts of the brain, are you still fully human? Are you still the biological entity that, as an Orthodox Christian, we believe God intended us to be and created us to be? These are massive questions that, for many of these people, they really don't care to answer, because they view your brain as a computer, a biological computer, and therefore this is part and central to their research. So getting back here, we can see from after Jose Delgado in 1954, we can get to 1969, the first cochlear implant implanted, restoring the sense of sound and demonstrating the possibilities of neural implants. In 1996, neurotrophic electrodes were implanted in a paralyzed man, enabling him to control a computer cursor. This is some of the things, if you saw the Twitter space that Elon Musk was just in with Alex Jones, Vivek Ramaswamy, all these different people, he was highlighting that Neuralink is now in its human phase trials, and that they're implanting the Neuralink in paraplegic people so that they can have full control of their computer screens and the computer. Again, these are BMIs or BCIs. These are brain machine interfaces, or brain computer interface chips. That's the point of it. And as we see, once we get to the later 90s, where computers are much more developed than they were in the 50s and 60s, that's exactly what they're doing. In 1997, deep brain stimulation, the Deep Brain Project, is something that Google did to map the entire structure of the brain. And that deep brain stimulation is approved in the USA as a treatment for Parkinson's disease. In 2005, a man with tetraplegia is able to control a robot arm due to a brain-computer interface, BCI, created as part of the BrainGate project. In 2016, or here we go, 2012, BrainGate allows a woman to drink from a bottle by controlling a robotic arm with her thoughts. In 2016, Elon Musk launches Neuralink to develop ultra high bandwidth brain machine interfaces, BMIs. So you see BCI, BMI, these are going to be basically interchangeable. And in 2018, 3 people with paraplegia are able to walk due to wireless spinal implants. So again, this is just a little bit of an introduction of what we're going to be doing tonight. So I want to, again, another super chat. Major thank you to Maximos for the $2.99. Christus Verbiscum. Merry Christmas to all. Thank you very much, Maximus, for that support. I truly appreciate it. Again, you guys are helping me get closer and closer to being able to purchase this book, which is the goal for tonight's stream. I hope to raise enough money for that. So thank you very much, Maximus, for that. And our brother, Dr. Crispy Rothschild, a COTEL crew member for 6 months, says, I just want to link my brain to my smart fridge to order tofu and kibble. Yeah, well, they would love for you to do that. They really would. So I'm sure that technology is already here and present. So if that's what you want, Dr. Crispy, I'm sure you can have that. All right. So just wanted to let everybody know, if you do want to show some support for tonight's stream, the best way is to use the Streamlabs or the Dono chat link. Both of those are in the video description, or YouTube if you prefer YouTube. So again, let me do my little monologue here in regards to introducing this topic. We've already covered a little bit here, but this project about brain implants has to do mostly with the realization that electricity is essential to the way that the human body functions, and that stimulating different parts of the brain can actually stimulate the body and stimulate various behaviors. So this was the realization, as I said, that electrical stimulation can not only stimulate muscles, but also the brain itself. Under MK Ultra subprojects 94 and 119, these were subprojects that had the specific intentions of putting electrodes in brains for the purpose of seeing how they could remotely control individuals. It began, for example, Jose Delgado's research began with these implants, and there'd be huge cords in monkeys, rats, bulls. Well, the bull was after it was remote control, and even humans, and they would have these huge cords hanging out of their heads. But once they got into the 60s, they were able to use remote control. And so he was able to sort of create these controls with various buttons, and the buttons would highlight which part of the brain would be stimulated, and he could turn off and turn on. And so in part 2, which is already up on the website, we play basically the second half of the documentary, The Minds of Men, and I talk about aspects of it, and it's very, very eye-opening. So this leads the theorists, especially at that point in the early 20th century, of seeing the brain as a biocomputer. And the reason they saw this is because the development of the field of cybernetics. So for those of you who aren't familiar, here, let me pull this up. Cybernetics is applied to complex systems. Cybernetics is associated with models in which monitor compares what is happening to a system at various sampling times with some standard of what could be happening, and controller could adjust the system. Okay, cybernetics comes from, it's often referred to as pilot. It comes from the Greek word cybernetikos, good at steering, or often translated as pilot. But if we scroll down here, we look at Norbert Wiener. So the American mathematician Norbert Wiener, and that's why it's so important, because he used various forms of like mathematical logic, and that's how he created the autocorrelator, is that by creating these various mathematical equations, programming them into the computer, he was able to begin to map the EEGs and the actual brain patterns of people. He published his book Cybernetics in 1948. In that book, Wiener made reference to an 1868 article by British physicist James Clerk Maxwell on governors that pointed out the term governor is derived via the Latin from the same Greek word that gives rise to cybernetics. The date of Wiener's publication is generally accepted as making the birth of cybernetics as an independent science. Wiener defined cybernetics as a science of control and communications in the animal and the machine. Often people think about cybernetics and they think of sort of informational feedback loops concerning machines, but the the initial point of the research was seeing how these informational feedback loops move through humans, move through man, and can be altered and manipulated. Therefore, it makes sense the informational cybernetic feedback loop of the autocorrelator of our electrified society. Stopping at a green light, for example, is an electrical signal, the green light, that then has an informational feedback loop that we register through our brains and then act accordingly. So this is a minor instance of a sort of cybernetic feedback loop that we then act in accordance with machines, electrical digital technology. This definition relates cybernetics closely with the theory of automatic control and also with physiology, particularly the physiology of the nervous system. For instance, a controller might be the human brain, which might receive signals from a monitor, the eyes, regarding the distance between a reaching hand and the object to be picked up. The information sent by the monitor to the controller is called feedback. And on the basis of this feedback, the controller might issue instructions to bring the observed behavior, the reach of the hand, closer to the desired behavior, the picking up of the object. Indeed, some of the earliest work done in cybernetics was the study of control rules by which human action takes place with the goal of constructing artificial limbs that could be tied in with the brain. Of course, we know this is totally possible. I did a stream on cyborgs. They can absolutely tap into your central nervous system at this point, along with your brain, and you can have a fully functioning artificial limb, a leg, an arm, and you control it by pure thought. So that's the reason why we got there, is again through the research of cybernetics. In subsequent years, the computer and the areas of mathematics related to it, intended examples, mathematical logic, had a great influence on the development of cybernetics for the simple reason that computers can be used not only for automatic calculations, but also for all conversions of information, including the various types of information processing used in control systems. This enhanced ability of computers has made possible two different views of cybernetics. The narrower view, common in Western countries, defines cybernetics as the science of the control of complex systems of various types, technological, biological, and social. In many Western countries, particular emphasis is given to aspects of cybernetics used in the generation of control systems in technology and in living organisms. A broader view of cybernetics arose in Russia and other Soviet republics and prevailed there for many years. And this broader definition, cybernetics, includes not only the science of control, but all forms of information processing as well. And this way, computer science, considered a separate discipline in the West, is included as one of the component parts of cybernetics. So it was through the cybernetic research that various theorists began to look at man as a biological machine. And this divorces the concept of sort of a mind or even free will to a full degree. Some of these people would reject that we have full autonomous free will. But these informational feedback loops began to look at man and his techno environment, shaping him and creating a new being. They believe that the man of the 20th century, and of course now even deeper into the 21st century, is becoming something totally different due to these cybernetic feedback loops and our constant interaction with electronic technology. So they began to theorize that they could program a biological person similar to the way that they program a computer by creating, again, these cybernetic feedback loops. This is where Jose Delgado picks up on this cybernetic research, and cybernetics really gets going again as Dr. Norbert Weiner's book was in 1948. So throughout the 30s, the 40s, and then into the 50s, cybernetics was a huge topic of some of the most prominent scientists in the West. And once Stalin died, what was that, in 1952, I believe Stalin dies. In 1953 and forward, we see that there's secret meetings between the most prominent scientists regarding to psychosurgery, neurosurgery, brain implants, cybernetics, and various Soviet scholars as well. So even though we were in a Cold War, I think what we can see is much of the Cold War and the space race during that point was less about actual race into space and more so about a race into the space within your head and understanding how to control that, manipulate that, and eventually by remote control the behavior of people. So Dr. Jose Delgado began to what he believed, conquering the human mind is a national goal. As I said, Dr. Jose Delgado was not somebody in favor of the concept of individualism, and he believed the only thing that has rights is the collective, the society, and that individuals were expendable. And this comes forward in the research of people like Dr. Vernon Mark, Frank Irvin, who took an individual. Again, as I told you, there was these race riots happening in the 1960s. Well, at that time, the media was talking about how violence was an epidemic in America, and that Americans and America was an overly violent nation, and that this needed to be cured. And so Lyndon B. Johnson, the president at the time, commissioned a new study of how to control violence, the psychological factors that contribute to violent behavior. And so under that auspices, these doctors like Dr. Vernon Mark and Frank Irvin, they would take individuals and began to limit their violent behaviors. One individual, his name was Leonard Kyle. There was a famous book that Vernon Mark and Frank Irvin wrote. Let me see if I can find that real quick. Here it is, which was a total lie. It was called Violence and Destruction, Violence and the Brain. This was, again, you can see here by Vernon H. Mark and Frank R. Irvin, published in 1970, which was actually a total fraud. In that book, they claimed that they had a man named Thomas R., which was a pseudonym. It was actually a gentleman named Leonard Kyle, and he was a prominent engineer. He had U.S. patents for Polaroid. He was working for a variety of major corporations in the United States. And these gentlemen said that he had violent behavior. He had outrages of violence, and he was going to the VA. I guess he had, in actuality, he had minor levels of depression. Turns out he actually wasn't a violent person, but through their ability, they took this man into their research facility at the Massachusetts General Hospital and began to place electrodes into his brain to cure his violence tendencies. Now, according to some of the papers that later came out due to FOIA requests, Leonard Kyle was upset with his wife because he believed that she was having an affair with him. A gentleman was renting a room in their house, and he believed while he was at work, his wife was actually having an affair with this particular gentleman. His wife actually she first sent him to her own psychiatrist, but then recommended him for this type of research because she claimed he was too violent. Turns out he wasn't violent. There were, again, the doctors here, Vernon Mark and Frank Irvin, claimed that he was slamming his pregnant wife into the wall. He had 6 children, claimed that he was slamming his children, none of which happened. According to Dr. Peter Bregan, the only thing that happened is he threw a canned food at his wife, did not hit her with it, but it smashed against the wall. And that was the only reported violent act that this man had. However, they basically turned him into a vegetable. They began to experiment. They put over 80 electrodes into his brain. He would walk around a psych ward or at the VA hospital or at the Massachusetts General Hospital, and they would manipulate his behavior without him even knowing it, because they had this ginormous remote control, and they began to experiment with him. And this pretty much destroyed the man. And it shows you the lack of ethics that's taking place during this time. So my point is that Jose Delgado is not an anomaly when he talks about the conquering of the human mind as a national goal and all individuals are expendable. And so a gentleman, really interestingly, named Dr. William Sweet was well aware. It turns out that Vernon Mark, this gentleman right here, Dr. William Herbert Sweet, here's a huge, lovely article about him in the Harvard Gazette, fails to mention the fact that Dr. William Sweet was signing off. He was one of the most well-connected doctors, chief neurosurgeon, emeritus of Harvard Medical School, former chief neurological service, Massachusetts General Hospital, and they totally lied. So in this book, Dr. Vernon Marx and Frank Irvin claimed that Thomas R., Leonard Kyle, was a major success. They were able to hook all these electrodes into his brain and totally nullified all his violent behavior, was able to release him back into society, and he had no ill effects. It was a total lie. The man was in a psych ward. He was never released. And he only became worse and worse and worse due to their research. and he was basically just a guinea pig. And so much funding coming even from the US Congress. Congress wrote recent research grants to these people based on the idea that this research was limiting violence. And this is one of the worst social epidemics in America because Americans are inherently violent, according to these studies. So even this gentleman right here, Dr. William Sweet, despite this lovely memorial, again, talking about how he was such an ethical person, he had a profound effect on his children. Um, in my eyes, he was a pattern of virtue, said David Sweet, the son of Dr. William Sweet. And I don't know about these children. He may have been a wonderful father to them, but he was well aware that these doctors, and him included, were totally lying about the fact that this Thomas R. Leonard Kyle was actually not free. He was not a success. And turns out, I think it was over 40 patients that they did this research to, none of which they actually found evidence that they had violent tendencies or behavior before the research began. So going back to Dr. Jose Delgado, he believed, as I said earlier, that America's founding is scientifically incorrect based on their research on cybernetics, electronic stimulation, these informational feedback loops, that man was not autonomous and that there were too many socio and cybernetic forces for there to be true autonomous individuals. And therefore, society has a right, not the individual, and anything can be done for the betterment of the social good. I want to say that this is all done under the disguise of the medical field, right? So this was always to help people. This was to limit violence. This was to advance man and create him as, again, the book that I hope you guys help me get some funds for tonight, The Physical Control of the Mind Toward a Psycho-Civilized Society by Dr. Jose Delgado. For a psycho-civilized society. This medical research was to civilize man. This is for your own betterment. This is not to harm you. This is because you're harming yourself because you're not up to par. And so this guise of the medical, you can't help but correlate it to things that are being mentioned today. Oh, I didn't even bring this up. This was the book. Again, for those of you who just joined, if you're feeling generous this Christmas season, the point of tonight's stream, I'm trying to raise some funds for this book right here, The Physical Control of the Mind Toward a Psycho-Civilized Society, by the gentleman we're discussing, Dr. Jose Delgado. So if you'd like to support, please do, using the Streamlabs or Dono chat link or YouTube. So all this was done under the auspices of medicine and helping patients. And this is exactly what we hear when we look at this part one video, which is going to focus much more on the contemporary issues of Neuralink and Elon Musk research, because even though I have a video on the premiering of the Neuralink technology, during that premiere, during that press conference, Elon Musk says the whole intention of Neuralink is to create a symbiosis of man and artificial intelligence. Now, of course, he goes on to Joe Rogan and tells everybody about the ills of artificial intelligence, yet at the same time, his explicit intended purpose of Neuralink is to make sure that your brain can interact directly with an artificial intelligence, of which then it can monitor the EEGs that are going on in your brain, and it can then feed back information, whether to activate, stimulate, or negate various parts of your brain. Of course, this is working. So as Elon Musk talked about in his Twitter space, there are human trials right now with paraplegics, and they're putting in Neuralink devices in the skull. And people who are totally paraplegic can now control their computer with their mind. And so it's not that they can't do this. And Elon Musk talks about how they're trying to give hearing to the deaf, that Neuralink is going to allow deaf people to hear. It's going to allow blind people to see. It's going to allow paraplegic people to walk. You can't help but notice the overlaps with some of the work of Christ, of which was done through miracles in God's will as a believer, versus the use of these sort of invasive technologies. And who is to say that Neuralink, and apparently, as we'll watch the video, Neuralink is going to be an app. So once you get the implant in your head, you'll be able to monitor your own EEGs by looking at your app, and you can in some way influence it yourself, monitor it yourself. But who wants to be hooked up to an advanced artificial intelligence that's going to be able to have full access to you? And as we've demonstrated with books like this, and provide full physical control of the mind, which leads to full physical control of the body. Sounds like a bit of an inversion, if you ask me. But the point of this science is that it's totally here. It's now. They're able to do this stuff. This isn't science fiction. This is present tense. And yeah, so Neuralink is described in the exact same medical ways in which the research that I just highlighted of people like Dr. Vernon Mark, Frank Irvin, Jose Delgado, William Sweet, Norbert Weiner, all of them performed their experiments under the auspices of medicine and helping people. Now, I'm not saying that they didn't help people, because as we saw, like cochlear implants were able to be implanted and deaf people were able to hear to some degree due to this research. And that's why it's a sort of double-edged sword, right? I mean, if you had a relative or a parent or a sibling that was deaf or blind and they have the opportunity to be able to see or hear, you think that'd be a great thing. But at what expense? And what expense at our society as we're moving to a point in which all this information can essentially be centrally controlled, especially if it's tied to an artificial intelligence, let alone, people who are familiar with cyber polygon, that imagine all these people hooked up to these electronic devices, electrodes in the brain. What happens if, the grid goes out, electronics go out, it all begins to backfire? Who knows? So I ask, is this really an amplification or a dehumanization? Again, we talked about in the extropian stream, the central philosophy of transhumanism, that one of their central goals is to eliminate suffering. But is the elimination of suffering to the human man, is that really going to make him more human? Is that going to make him better? What about the continual pleasure senses? So like one of the researches that Dr. Jose Delgado did is he put electrodes into a rat, and the rat was able to step on a pedal, and that pedal would stimulate the pleasure sense of the brain. Well, what happened to the rat? The rat would become so addicted to stepping on the pedal to receive the stimulation to the pleasure sense of his brain that he was willing to forfeit eating, forfeit sexual habits, forfeit even the safety of himself. They would place an electric grid. They would electrify it, and there'd be a pedal on this side and a pedal on this side. The rat would run across the electric grid of great pain to itself to get onto this side so it could step on the pedal, get its stimulus, and then he'd have to go to the other pedal to get that stimulus again. And he would still run across an electrified grid that would shock him and harm him just to get his pleasure sense. And you think, geez, that sounds a lot like the Kumpad future that many people have theorized about, where you get all the pleasure you want, but you'll own nothing and you'll like it. And the fact that this research was already carried out in the 1950s makes it a little bit worrisome, because where is the state of this technology in 2023, in the 21st century? As we'll see, the electrodes that Neuralink puts in are so much smaller and yet so much more powerful. And the electrodes themselves are so fine, they're about the same size as a neuron itself. A little bit worrisome. And so is this really about the amplification of man? Is this really about the development and taking man to a new state? Or is this about a limitation? Is this about a dehumanization? And so I have a couple quotes I want to share with you guys. And the first one comes from this book right here. This is from the 1960s. This is from a gentleman named Jacques Ellul. Let me make sure it's from the 60s. It might have been earlier. This is from 1964. This is a French intellectual who was critical of where technology was taking society, and he wrote a book called The Technological Society. And Jacques Ellul writes, this is a quote: "The complete joining of man and machine will be calculated according to a strict system, the so-called biocracy." So biocracy. It will be impossible to escape this system of adaptation because it will be articulated with such scientific understanding of the human being. The individual will have no more need for his own conscience and the utilization of virtue. His moral and mental furnishings will be a matter of the biocrat's decisions. Interesting. Very interesting. And another quote that I have that is interesting in regards to maybe some of the spiritual implications of this stuff. This comes from a gentleman which we probably wouldn't support. It actually comes from Rudolf Steiner, one of the perennialist part of the traditionalist school. But he had an interesting quote from the from the early 20th century, late 1800s, late 19th century, and says, "In the future, we will eliminate the soul with medicine. Under the pretext of a healthy point of view, there will be a jibby jab," he uses the V word, "by which the human body will be treated as soon as possible directly at birth, so that the human being cannot develop the thought of existence of a soul or spirit. Two materialistic doctors will be entrusted with the task of removing the soul of humanity. As today people are vaccinated against this disease or that disease, so in the future children will be jibby jabbed with a substance that can produce precisely in such a way that people, thanks to his jibby jab, will be immune to being subject to the madness of the spiritual life. He will be extremely smart, but he would not develop a conscience, and that is the goal of some materialistic circles." And so I ask you, is this the case? It certainly seems plausible to some degree. And this leads to, again, a Pavlovian response. Are we really just Pavlov's dogs? If we all have electrodes in our brain and we're able to get our pleasure senses tingled whenever we want, are we truly human? Because this is part of the transhumanist rhetoric, is that that's going to free you. It's going to limit you. But from my understanding, that's only going to enslave you. That's going to put you in a box. That's going to limit who you are and your capabilities. I don't see any freedom there at all. And in fact, that correlates with Dr. David Pearce's research in regards to his negative utilitarianism and the elimination of suffering. Eliminating suffering does not make my life better. Suffering is something that's essential for my own growth. Suffering is something that was shared by me and the incarnated God. And suffering is something that makes us more human and makes us able to develop and change and course correct. And if you don't have that, just like somebody who doesn't have the ability to feel pain, they can put their hand over a flame and the flame begins to blister their skin. It begins to burn their body, but they can't feel it. Is that truly healthy? Is that truly an advancement? Or is that a dehumanization? I ask you guys. And so is this really about us becoming automatons, right? Because much of this research is built upon the idea that you actually don't have free will, and that free will of the individual really isn't something to worry too much about. And this sounds like we're becoming more and more like a robot, as this symbiosis, we'll see that Elon Musk is in favor of regarding Neuralink. This sounds more like us becoming like a machine versus a symbiosis with machines.